Do you want to be a macho man? Or are you already one of those badasses? Do you have the right stuff? Stick to your guns. Bench press 800 pounds. Assert your rights. Being all you can be. All that in a bag of chips. Well, hero, how did you do on the test? Everyone can talk big shit. Not everyone can measure up and back it up. Some 77% of age-eligible Americans for military service do not even have to worry about the draft because they are already unfit for even joining the infantry. And less than 1% of these Yanks even do that Top Gun Rambo thing. But it is a free country, and you can always train. With 94.73% having received at least one dose of the shot, as I say, the Empire State of New York had even surpassed the 91.32% threshold claimed by those in Virginia. And that's the seventh most educated state in the Union. And so, folks in New York, the big city, the Big Apple, lead the nation for the achievement of getting persons to comply with the vaccine mandates ahead of the entire nation, where at least 81.39% had received at least one dose. Upon the rescission of the vaccine mandate for the military in January 2023, where they followed orders, beating even the great Empire State of New York, the Department of Defense had even published an attaboy. Thanks for your service. Good job, commanders. Formal memorandum to senior Pentagon leadership, commanders of combatant commands, defense agencies and DoD field activity directors, to announce that the department had made COVID-19 vaccination easy. Yes, sir, I only follow orders, of course, and convenient as possible, resulting in vaccines administered to over 2 million service members and 96% of the force, active, and reserves being fully vaccinated, not just one shot. The official claim is that vaccination enhances operational readiness and protects the force. But just common sense says that this was a new product and it was rapidly developed to address a brand new virus. Not just military regulations, but the law actually forbids human experimentation without informed consent, unless waived expressly by the President. And at least in courts, those who participate, especially as consenting adults, are presumed to be rational persons with ordinary sense and intellect. Would you jump off a bridge if you had been mandated to do so, especially if you weren't in the army? Probably not. And courts describe this fact pattern as assumption of risk even before we get to statutes of limitation and other things you run into in court. You hop on a roller coaster, pass all the warning signs along the way, and happen to get injured. There is still contributory negligence if you decided to get on that ride, if you did not take care to do all the things that you could have done before you decided to place your faith and trust in some other power on earth or up in heaven. Life ain't no movie. Still, many may recall a film from almost 3 decades ago with Matt Damon, Danny DeVito, and Ricky Moore, with John Boyd in portraying the evil villain, in which a recent graduate from law school goes to a law firm. Not the best law firm in the world, but a law firm, before he has even obtained a license to practice. and finds himself working for a fella named Bruiser. Life doesn't get any better than that, one can imagine. And the Matt Damon character in The Rainmaker had what might barely be described as a bad first day in court in a case brought against a wealthy health insurance company. A formidable foe to go up against, even in real life, if you've ever been there. Not just the movies. And a determined scheme he had to go against to systematically deny claims brought by persons who had dutifully each month paid them premiums to the company, with a reasonable expectancy that one day, that day might never come with health insurance when havoc struck. The good hands in the solid rock would be there to make good on the promises and assurances that they had made in the commercials. And when Matt Damon, full of dreams and fresh out of law school, arrived in that courtroom, suddenly the situation changed and reality sank in. But at least in the movies, his character decided to kick in his heels, dig in for a protracted battle, persevering to the end of a tear-jerking and triumphant conclusion, get the girl, kiss the girl. But rather tragically, in real life, most people don't really live their lives on the movie screen. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, says the golden rule. And in the law of torts, familiar to attorneys, jurists, and legal scholars, this dictates that the general standard of duty is the duty of reasonable care. That is, the duty to avoid negligent conduct. You don't want to be repeatedly touching the hot stove. And this general duty is owed to those within reach of a defendant's conduct. You don't want to touch the hot stove with your burning hand, burn others. And if you happen to go to law school, discussing strict liability and topics like that, you too may learn about a British case decided in 1868, Rylands v. Fletcher, which is today recognized in most American jurisdictions and that states a very simple rule, especially for those familiar with the study of economics and externalities, or even for those familiar with films like Aaron Brockovich, involving power lines installed in reckless disregard of life for children playing on playgrounds. The rule says that if a person brings or accumulates on his land anything, if it should escape, may cause damage to his neighbor, he does so at his own peril. Apparently, we, according to the White House, have a lab that leaked, but nobody is doing anything at all about it. According to the press, the cicada variant is in 31 states, but nobody is doing anything about this lab where it came from. But under the rule in Rylands v. Fletcher, if it does escape and cause damage, that person is responsible, however careful he may have even been, and whatever precautions he may have taken to prevent that damage. You broke it and you brought it. Sounds like a common sense rule. Sounds very fair, and perhaps it may even be a bit cathartic to say, while commiserating with your similarly situated family and friends in a local watering hole, at a church, or while playing philosopher and warrior badass on social media, in what amounts to really just a fantasy rule. At least until you decide to put on your big boy pants and go to court. Several prominent scientists have opined or observed rather piously that failure to comprehensively investigate the zoonotic origin through collaborative and carefully coordinated studies would leave the world vulnerable to future pandemics arising from the same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses. And cut camera off. Because still, years after the start of the global pandemic, there has yet to be a comprehensive forensic investigation into its origins. The good that we don't. And did you ever wonder why? perhaps it just sells soap. At least in the military, however, as dictated by regulation, where almost 100% have been vaccinated. The decision-making process begins with the receipt or anticipation of a new mission. And according to former President Joe Biden, the commander-in-chief, we were hit with a virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked. Yet, at least by military regulation, once the new mission is received, the commander and the staff must do a quick initial estimate. An assessment which is designed to optimize the commander's use of time while preserving time for subordinate commanders to plan and complete combat operations and preparations. We only have the 80-20 rule in the military. Even Dr. Anthony Fauci and Robert Redfield have said every outbreak provides an opportunity at the beginning to gain important information, some of which is associated with a limited window of opportunity, which may provide a unique window of opportunity for early intervention. You're not going to win if you don't have the right information. And according to Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, rosing up intelligence doesn't help us be successful in this fight. You can tell anybody that you want that you're smart, but you kind of have to prove it sometimes. And they have been to the crossroads in their lives. And at least they say that they knew the path, the right path that leads to virtue, achievement, success, and all of those other good things. But what happened? In what became the longest respiratory tract infection pandemic in history, a natural occurrence that actually has occurred once every 20 years since the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, but which had occurred in those previous instances without societal interruption and disruption. No headline news, they just kind of came and went away like something absolutely wrong. Involving science. The situation had changed. But did you ever wonder why? In the military, at least, upon receipt of the new mission, the key question is, does the commander need to know in a specific situation to make a particular decision in a timely manner, in the optimal state? Even World Health public officials had strongly encouraged world leaders expecting not exported, but specifically imported cases, suggesting a slightly different meaning and nuance to fully educate the general public. Why would they state these very important early instructions in that particular way? They did not say then. They do not say now. Did you ever wonder why? Did you even know? You generally don't get the exciting climax seen in a real courtroom with a Navy JAG attorney taking on a Marine Corps colonel and asking who ordered the code red, without sufficient preparation, at least in case development, requiring some research and mastery of certain subjects that may themselves be novel. And at least with respect to cases brought in fraudulent concealment, courts have said that just a mere failure to disclose pertinent information, absent some other duty, is not sufficient to toll the statute of limitations unless there has been some affirmative act of concealment. Because fraudulent concealment requires something of an affirmative nature designed to prevent discovery of a cause of action. And courts, as we have submitted, in this present case might conclude that it is not difficult to imagine how the failure to provide proper summary information had injured others even if they did not themselves act in reliance. We doubt that Congress or any rightful government authority would have wanted to bar relief in those instances. The long journey most often begins with the very first step. And at least in the military, where intelligence drives the mission cycle, there is a recognition that a failure to begin with a clear picture to be later refined can snowball out of control, introducing stubborn biases, distorted priorities, and cumulative missteps. Even former President Joe Biden has said that the failure to get our inspectors on the ground in those early months will always hamper any investigation into the origin of COVID-19. That's what he has said. And under the law, in courts, simple negligence is the failure to exercise the care of an ordinarily prudent person in the same or similar circumstances. If something was wrong and you had inquiry notice, why didn't you attempt to get actual notice by investigating? Simple question. Well, gross negligence is the utter disregard of prudence and complete neglect of the safety of another that would shock fair-minded men. If you saw that baby sitting on the edge of the Grand Canyon, why didn't you do something? Criminal negligence, in turn, is defined as an act or failure to act which demonstrates a willful, wanton, or reckless disregard for the safety of others who might reasonably be expected to be injured thereby. Some 15 years after the end of World War II, after the end of the Holocaust, finally, Adolf Eichmann was tracked down in Argentina, extradited, and brought to Israel, where, considering crimes against humanity, that court had concluded that the excuse given by the accused in his evidence that all he did was to pass on a message which he had received from Krakow is not even plausible. And they had concluded that undoubtedly he knew the value of the administration of the tonics to which he had put his signature. A lot of people retreat to echo chambers in social media and ask, why hasn't this happened or that happened, or why hasn't someone been prosecuted or go to jail? Besides the requirements for a 911 emergency call, a police investigation, and an indictment, nothing ever even happens in the movies. You're not telepathic. Things don't just happen all by themselves, and even in court you have to, after that, have a jury of persons who are even interested in being there. However, more than 5 years after the pandemic has begun, most Americans already see COVID-19 through the rearview mirror. It's in the past. And indeed, as Daniel Patrick Moynihan had said, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own bikes. Even Rochelle Walensky, MD, had observed that this virus isn't stupid, while human behavior in this pandemic hadn't served us very well. Anthony Fauci, MD, had noted that this virus had fooled us before. Even the founding fathers of this nation, where Joe Biden had said, finding the light in the darkness is a very American thing to do. In fact, the most American thing we do. Had noted that all experience has shown that mankind are far more rather disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. That was Thomas Jefferson 250 years ago. And even the father of evolution theory, Charles Darwin, had lamented, I have nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the origin of mental powers, even under evolutionary pressure. Certainly one can't easily ascertain indicia of a certain tendency towards at least myopia, if not apathy. It is what it is, and it was what it was, and life goes on. However, if, as data suggests, like the military, almost 100% had gotten the shot, in Virginia, 91% had volunteered for at least the first dose. That means if you were ever at a social gathering of 10 or more, be it a church, a grocery store, a movie theater, 9 out of 10 of the people around you had decided to just get vaccinated, volunteering for a brand new product rapidly developed in the Trump administration to address a virus that scientists say they still don't even understand or have any idea about the proximal origins. Would you take a journey to the moon in a spaceship prepared by scientists who had no idea what awaited you beyond the clouds? That's what 90% of persons in Virginia did. Some people assumed some risks, perhaps even yourself. And so let that sink in, because this is where we are in terms of dealing with just a little bit of those 5 stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression. Did you ever wonder why? And what about that 1% who never did? With whom many who decided not to get boosted very soon began to join after the end of the pandemic declaration. Did they just happen to make a lucky guess? Or did they know something that others did not? Everyone wants to be a badass in the movie, but would you risk your real life in a lethal pandemic on a lucky guess and describe that as rational behavior? And recall that criminal negligence is defined as an act or failure to act which demonstrates a willful, wanton, and reckless disregard for the safety of others who might reasonably be expected to be injured thereby. Or are you the Superman who decided to only save yourself? Or are you the stupid man who decided to put others at risk while you decided to be a fool? Let that sink in. At least the courts say that a reasonable person engages in due diligence to discover all that could happen new. To a person of ordinary intelligence, a duty of inquiry arises when there is a probability that he has been defrauded. And a duty of inquiry arises if he omits that inquiry when it would have developed the truth and shuts his eyes in willful blindness to the facts which call for investigation. Knowledge of the fraud will be imputed then, not to the defendant, but to him. A person cannot claim ignorance when facts call for investigation, because in such a case the person has a duty of inquiry. Ideas must be distinct before reason can act upon them. So beyond 9 and 10 folks who just decided to play Russian roulette with a new product, guinea pig in the pandemic, that most have decided not to do again for whatever reason, what does that person with at least more sense than the reckless superheroes who decided to only save themselves look like? To all these people who are vaccinated, more of them than the others. Perhaps even by anecdote, there are not many surprises according to KFF, the leading health policy organization in the U.S. 91% of Democrats are test pilots for the novel virus. vaccine, described only as a medical countermeasure in the law. Not as a vaccine, but as just a countermeasure. Rapidly developed without even knowledge of infectious dose or the number of particles that had to infect you, which to a vaccinologist would introduce some risk. 91% of Democrats had gotten at least one dose and had apparently perceived a risk, informed or uninformed, as high as those persons aged 65 and older. Now the word was disseminated very early that with respect to morbidity and even hospitalization, the elderly were most vulnerable and at risk. And so 9 out of 10 sounds rather expected for that demographic. But 9 out of 10 college graduates, what exactly were they thinking? What changed their mind on getting boosted again? Here was another surprise. To the extent that you would expect wealth to correlate with access to information, just slightly below the college graduates, at 89% of persons with household incomes of $90,000 or more had just slightly surpassed those ages 50 to 64, right in those age brackets where the risk of fatality began to increase, representing 86% of that demographic who had perceived a risk equal to one of the most infected populations. But Hispanics, only 83% of them had taken that similar chance to get the shot. And so our macho men can probably find a little pride taken away because they are not so far from their woman counterparts, finding 77% of them vaccinated compared to 79% of women. So the next time that you're at the bar or at the club, just remember, whether it looks like a dude or a babe, or even if you aren't quite sure, there is an 8 in 10 chance that they had reacted about the same in a pandemic and gotten the shot. Scared out of their minds or uninformed. Let that sink in, Einstein. Macho man. Clock, stop. You just missed stupid, man. This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest.